when the world has got you down. And
Alzheimer's sucks. It's an equal opportunity disease that chips away at everything we hold dear. And to date, there's no cure. So until there is, we continue to fight with the most powerful tool in our arsenal, love. This is Love Conquers Alls, a real and really positive podcast that takes a deep dive into everything Alzheimer's, the good, the bad, and everything in between. And now, here are your hosts, Susie Singer-Carter and me, Don Priest.
Hello, everybody. I'm Susie Singer-Carter.
And I'm Don Priest, and this is Love Conquers Alls. Hello, Susan.
Hi, Donald. What's up?
How are you? So what's happening?
A lot of good things are happening for our other podcast, I Love Lucifer. And
Yes.
I'm excited about that. So stay tuned for some announcements for season 2. And one thing is I'm going to say my mom is in the hospital. She's been in the hospital for going on 10 days now.
Almost 2 weeks, yeah.
Yeah, almost 2 weeks. So, which is pretty much a direct cause of the issue that we're going to talk about today, and amongst other things. So we have a really wonderful guest today, Dawn, that I met once again on social media and now is a part of my community, and I'm a part of her community. And her name is Jennifer Lagemann. She's only 23 years old, and every time she writes something about caregiving or aging and embracing aging in a dignified, healthy way, I'm blown away because she has such insight and depth and soul, and she just is such a great role model for her generation, which I'm not quite sure if I think it's Gen X? No, and Gen Z. This is a fresh perspective and just the face of the new generation coming up. And I just wanted to introduce everybody to her, if you don't know her already, because she's going to be such a force in our community, and I just have so much respect for her. Jenn was a family caregiver who spent most of her career in private duty home care industry, in scheduling and intake coordinator, and she's currently a copywriter, journalist, and researcher in the caregiving and aging space, and soon to be my coalition partner, because we're gonna band together and make some noise and make some change. And I'm very excited about that.
Time to storm Washington.
Yep. So without further ado, please welcome Jennifer Lagemann. Hello, Jen.
Hello, Jennifer.
Hi, guys. Thank you so much for having me today.
Oh, my gosh.
So happy to have
Thank you
you
for
here.
Thank you for coming and spending your Saturday morning with us. You're 23 years old. I don't understand how you are such a force in this community, but I'm so happy that you are. You are just such a special human being. And I just want tell the audience a little bit about your background and how you got interested in this whole arena and community of aging and caregiving.
Sure. When I was 12, my maternal grandmother started to need care. She had recovered from a stroke. She started having signs of dementia and was recovering from cancer all around the same time. And she needed companionship, socialization. She didn't need a whole ton of care from me in the beginning, but that's when I first started caregiving. And she lived with my family. She was a part of my family structure. And that's what I thought a nuclear family was, as far as I was concerned, in my household. And having that component when I was growing up, she had been the one raising me because both my parents worked during the day. So when I was at home, she was always the one that was making me my lunches and stuff. So I was used to having her as my main source of parenting. And that component really helped me to have an appreciation for older adults and aging. And so when I started school, I was a biology major going on a pre-med track. I wanted to be a geneticist. And then she passed away my first semester of college, and it really shook me in my background. And it really made me rethink where I wanted to go in life, how I was going to get there, and the sciences weren't really doing it for me. I wanted to do something more impactful and something that gave back to my community, which I felt in caregiving I could do, but I was going to do that through writing. because I'd written a lot as a kid, and I was like, I want to do this professionally. I want to upgrade it from a hobby to a career. And so I was like, well, what do I need to write about? Well, what do I know? Caregiving and, seniors, older adults, stuff like that. So that's how I kind of found my way into the industry.
Before she passed, was she ill? Were you actively caregiving for her, or was it just something that came on suddenly?
Yeah, she slowly declined over those 7 years I took care of her. It was just a little bit every here and there in the beginning, and then toward the end, we had home health coming in, we had hospice coming in, and my grandma was super feisty at 95, so even in getting her in the bath, it took two of us. So it was her aide and me. We would get her in the shower, but as soon as she got in the shower, though, she would start cleaning herself. She would help out. It was just a matter of getting her into the shower. That was the problem. But she was such a force. And then toward the end, she became bedbound, so it became more of sponge baths. But we had a really fantastic hospice aide that was unlike any of the other ones that we had. We always loved having her come over. She would get my grandma out of bed, put her in her wheelchair. We built a ramp, and she would wheel her outside. She'd pick a flower for her and come inside and make her lunch. It was like the most impactful thing ever. And it really put a seed in my head. I was like, ooh, I really want to be a caregiver. Despite the fact that most people probably don't ever want to be a caregiver for whatever reason, she really made me feel like she genuinely loves my grandma. And she didn't speak any English, so she talked to her like a friend. She really just asked, like, I remember my husband came over, and we were just dating at the time, not really with titles or anything, but she was like, look, your grandson and granddaughter are here. And it kind of, we looked at each other, we're like, oh. And it was just a really funny moment, between the four of us. I was like, she doesn't know that we're together. And I just thought it was the funniest thing that she tried to be so involved in our lives and was really a family caretaker. She wasn't just taking care of my grandma. She was really taking care of our whole family.
I think that observation is on point, because I think, like my mom's caregiver, who really became part of our family. And as my mom's disease progressed, she became her best friend. She was like, this is my best friend. You're my best friend. What are you talking about? And two more disparate people there weren't, right? There wasn't. And yet, the love was so palpable, and respect. And I think that kind of frames those kinds of caregivers that are really the best caregivers. They really just get into the family and become that. I think that is the core thing. And one other thing I wanted to touch on is that you decided you wanted to become a caregiver. And Lisa Gibbons, when I interviewed her, she said, it's funny, nobody grows up as a little kid and says, oh, when I get big, I want to be a caregiver. There's no caregiver Barbies. Well, you are caregiver Barbie. That's what you are. You really are. I mean, tell me a little bit about your relationship with your grandma, because it sounds like you had such a close relationship, and I think that obviously informed how you look at the world. And are you? And also, what's your cultural background? Because I always think that is a part of it too.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I was raised in a Vietnamese Chinese household. So that really informed my mom's parenting structure, how my grandmother was, because she wanted to be the doting, loving grandmother who gave everything that she could to her grandchild. And my mom was very strict with me, and that was something that kind of clashed between us as my grandmother needed more long-term care. I wanted to get my grandmother diagnosed, and it wasn't within her belief system to get her diagnosed. It was a part of the natural aging process, as many people think about. And when it came to culture, a lot of the healing process was really impactful for me. Like, whenever I was sick, I really enjoyed being home because my grandmother took care of me. She would take a dog tag and rub it on my back, and it would release all the hot air stored within my body, and it would just release all of that heat. And that was a part of our holistic wellness. Like Chinese acupuncture and holistic medicine. They practiced that in our household. It was very interesting to see these things unfold. Like, she would take a boiled egg right out of the pot and roll it on my back when I was sick. And then she'd take a knife, cut it open, and you'd see green spots in it the bacteria that came out. And
What?
I would say it's like fake or pseudoscience, but I'm like, well, how else would those green things have gotten into the yolk of the egg? You know what I mean? It's one of those weird things that.
Okay, now I have to try this. We have to try this.
If you have a cold or something like that, try it. And like, if you have like a dog tag or something similar, put some vapor up on your back and rub from the center out in lines, kind of like tiger stripes. I'll send you a link later to show you what it looks like. But yeah, it's super cool. It helps to release the hot air from inside your body when you have like a fever. So it helps to cool your body down from the inside out.
Wow. That's interesting. I mean, and it's also interesting in the Asian community that there is a lot of reverence to the elder generation, which is different than in American families. Our society is just so resistant to aging. So there's no respect for it. It's marginalized and minimalized and, tucked away. And I think, so for that, for that, and part of your culture is so beautiful and needs to be shared more. And then on the other hand, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe there's a lot of pride in the Asian community and a lot of resistance to, like you said, your mom having your grandma being diagnosed. Mm-hmm. Because there's a sort of a shame or a pride issue about identifying yourself that way.
Yeah, no, that's right. I think a lot of it's pride. And it was very interesting looking back the different ways that my family and I kind of behaved. Because like I was born in Massachusetts, so I was, American, and still am. But my mom, her process was very different. She subscribes to Buddhism, and it was when we were grieving, when my grandmother passed away, my mom said, "Don't cry. You're holding her back from her next life." And I was just like, I don't know how to not do that. It was just my instant reaction, and I was like, I can't help it. It's coming out now, and that was my way of grieving. And I wrote her letters. I wrote my grandmother letters on my laptop each day after she passed, just like, hey, I miss you so much. And it was just my way of grieving. Because I didn't know at the time that you were supposed to get bereavement support through your hospice. And we didn't get that. And luckily enough, I was in college, so I went to my grief counselor to help me out there. And I had a biology test the day after my grandmother passed away, and I ended up having to take it because they wouldn't give me an extension.
Oh my gosh.
It was so tough for me. Like, it was a really rough time. And my husband and I had only been together for a couple months. So, like, the bulk of our relationship has been post-grandma, which is really interesting. Because, I don't know, I'm a different person now than I was before.
I mean, because you're younger, you have, a social circle, you have friends who are probably not going through the same thing you're going through. How did they see what you were doing? Were they supportive of it, or going like, hey, come on, no, let's just go to the movies or something? What was their reaction?
Funny enough, I never told anybody outside of my social circle what I was doing. It wasn't something I talked about. I spent a lot of time at school to kind of escape those responsibilities, to, like join honors band, to be part of the robotics team, math team. I was on every team that you could possibly be on. I was in drama club. I was in everything to try and, kind of, my respite was going to after school activities. Right. And enjoying time with my peers. I didn't really talk about caregiving just because that was my family thing. And I didn't really know how to talk about it. I didn't know that I was a caregiver. I didn't know all these terms and the industry terms, the jargon. I didn't really know any of that. I was just, a grandkid doing her thing, I didn't really talk about it in the context of caregiving until I was applying for jobs. And I was like, oh, caregiver, what's that? Then I read the job description. I was like, oh, I've done that. And so I started working as a caregiver after that. And that's how I got into home care. But other than that, I really did not know I was a caregiver. And I couldn't even remember being asked to do this. I feel like it was kind of like just kind of swept under the rug. Now she's coming home from the hospital, and now we do this. It was very seamless.
Right.
But did your parents like ask you to do it, or did they just say this is something that you just as a family, this is what we do, or did it just come naturally?
It kind of came naturally. I don't remember being asked, and I feel like I just kind of shadowed my mom in that sense and just kind of wanted to help out and fill in where she couldn't, because she worked during the day. So during the summers when I wasn't in school, I was at home, and whenever my uncle, who would be there when I was in school, I would relieve him when I get off the bus.
It was a team effort.
It's so interesting. Did you ever, and I know how much you love your grandma because I feel it and hear it, and you've talked about it with me before. And so that said, did you ever feel resentment when you would come home and go, gosh, I just want to be a 17-year-old? Or
Yes.
I just want to go, yes, okay. Yeah, because that's normal, right?
Yeah, I felt a lot of that, especially when I got into college. I was like, I feel like I haven't gotten to complete my childhood yet. Now I'm, in college with all of my peers, and I don't feel like I'm where I'm supposed to be. I used college as an opportunity to really just let loose and have fun, and I felt bad for having fun. I really didn't feel like I was able to, or, it didn't feel right having fun. And I kind of used that as an opportunity to complete my childhood, in a sense.
Yeah, it's a thing that we talk about a lot, which is the guilt of taking care of yourself and realizing that it's really counterintuitive. By taking care of yourself, you're able to take care of them better. You're healthier.
Exactly.
And it's hard to come to terms with that, though. That's like, how could I be having fun when she's lying there? It's such a struggle. And did you ever come to terms with it, or was it after that you came to terms with it?
It was after. And I think it wasn't so much my grandmother as it was my mom as a gatekeeper. Like, I would be like, can I go to, my junior prom? I was like, no, you have to be home. Because what if something happens? You know what I mean? It wasn't so much my grandmother holding me back. It was more my mom. I feel like it was a lot of fear. She didn't know what was going on. She didn't really have as strong of a command of English as I did. And I was always going to the car dealership with her to make sure that the contracts read legitimately. And I went to every appointment with my grandmother to make sure that I could communicate with her physicians in the way that we needed to be communicated about, and with make sure that the right prescriptions were there, and kind of being her advocate. So there was a lot of elements that came into it as well, the translation part, because we spoke the southern dialect of Vietnamese, and most medical interpreters in like hospitals and dentist places only spoke the northern dialect, so it created that tension of language.
Have you seen the movie Coda?
I have not. What's it about?
Okay. It's a young girl who's part of a nuclear family. Her brother and her mom and her dad are all deaf. And it's based on a true story. And she was born as she could hear. So she became pretty much like the ears for the family, the translator, and the family as a unit depended on her, to where it impacted her life and made her feel guilty to want to pursue her life as an adult in the areas that she wanted to go, which was music, ironically, right? And the pressure on her to stay within the family and be the one that negotiates, like even like what you're talking about with contracts, like they were fishermen, and so she would have to go and deal with the buyers and make sure that they were getting a good deal and they weren't duping them, right? And the pressure that she went through, happens a lot. I mean, that happens in families, and you really lived that. And looking back on it, for other young people in your position, what kind of perspective that could you share that you've learned that might help somebody else that's in that position?
Sure. I would encourage people to be vocal about what they do. I never talked about this with anyone, and even knowing the symptoms I experienced as a caregiver, it wouldn't have been something I brought up in a physical exam with a doctor. Like, if someone had been like, are there any physical stressors going on in your life that could be, contributing to your mental health? I would have said no. I wouldn't have it wouldn't have even crossed my mind. It wouldn't have been something I talked about. So I feel like a lot of people might be in a similar situation to not be so forthcoming with what they're doing inside and outside of caregiving. I would encourage you to be more vocal about it and to talk about it with your peers, your parents, maybe your school counselors, maybe a teacher that you confide in with a lot of stuff. I had a couple of teachers that I was super close with in school, my band instructor especially. He's a very instrumental part of how I developed through high school, and he really pushed me and encouraged me, and I explored different things. Like, I was a flute player, but I also did vocals, and he taught me how to do DJing, so that was very interesting. He also taught me how to do some basic drumming stuff, so it really just taught me to expand my skill set and to really be open.
Oh, it's so great.
Yeah.
That's great.
It's amazing that after all, because you did feel guilt and you did feel like you kind of had your childhood somewhat not taken away, but let's say stunted, that you chose to continue on in this field. Because, I mean, there's something in it that talks to you. But, I mean, was there ever a point you just said, no, I just want to go to Europe and just do nothing after all of that?
Yeah. There was one time where, like, she had her meals on wheels come around like 8 a.m. every day during the week. And there was this one day during the summer, and I was like, I gotta make sure I wake up at 8. I didn't. And our aide came over and was like, where's lunch? And I opened the fridge and I made her a bowl of rice with some veggies. And I was like, why can't I just sleep in past 8 o'clock? Like, it was such a small thing that I felt super bad about. But I was also like, you know what? It's the summer. I'm out of school. I just want to enjoy the summer and to do what every other kid does during the summer. You know, going to amusement parks. But then again, it was just me as an only child. So I had that going for me because I didn't have a lot of people to go with.
Yeah, and that makes sense. So you know, I'm as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking how, you know, because I had a 16-year-old daughter that lived with me, my daughter, when my mom lived with us for a year, and I got quite a bit of you know, negative feedback initially from some of my peers, like, how can you bring your mom in? It's going to be so hard on your daughter. It's not fair. She's going through, you know, her own thing, and I was like, maybe it's not fair. Maybe I'm doing the wrong thing, you know? And so one of my friends who's a doctor and an endocrinologist and very respected, and I said, you know, am I doing the wrong thing? What would you do? And she said, you couldn't be doing the better thing. You're doing such a good thing by role modeling this to your daughter. You're modeling allegiance and family love and you know, accountability and all these things that are the good things. So at the end of that year that my mom lived with me, my daughter said, I'm not ready for Nanny to go. And it was a hard year. I mean, it was not easy. It was my mom being feisty like your grandma, feisty as hell, knocking on our doors at 3 a.m, you know, accusing us of stealing her jewelry when it was our earrings, right? And we had to learn how to deal with it. But we are such better people for it, right?
Absolutely.
And what would you say? So you know, we know the negatives. We know how hard it is. What are the positives, and what made you stay in it? And you know, how would you, what advice in that respect? What are the gifts that you can share with your peers that may be going, you know, no, it's my life. They're old and they've had their life. How can you speak to that?
Absolutely. My grandma was my absolute best friend. No matter how many best friends I may have gotten from school, she was absolutely my best friend by far. We grew together so much. Like, there were times where I had sleepovers downstairs. We retrofitted our dining room next to the kitchen into her bedroom, and we had like a curtain and all set up for her. But there were times where I'd sleep downstairs with her and kind of have like a sleepover. We'd stay up all night. We'd play games. She had these hand games that they would do in Vietnam. You'd like put your hands together and you'd like kind of manipulate your fingers in such a way, and you'd ask someone to touch a finger and like, is this your middle finger? And then you'd go like, oh yeah. It was a really fun, like, just, you know, fun games that we could play together. I'd play the piano and she'd listen. We'd go on walks together to the park. And it was really fun. We really did grow together. And she gave me my dark sense of humor. I know I got it from her. I remember there was one time I stubbed my knee on the corner of a table. And I was just sitting there like, oh my God, this hurts. And she just walked by with her walker and she started laughing. And Right, and that's where I got it from. I was like, you know what? When I'm having a tough time, just channel your dark humor and the funnier side of it.
Right. Well, humor is the best. Humor and music. So you're on it. You got the music, you got the humor. You're good to go. You got your armor.
Absolutely, I had all of my armor. And what's also cool is caregiving for my grandmother also acted as a filter for relationship candidates. When I started hanging out with my husband, he came over to the house, and it took a lot. And I was like, you know what? He loves me. I love him. Why not? And if it's not meant to be, it won't. And he came over. We were playing tarot cards, and my grandmother was getting personal care while we were doing this, and he, just kind of smelled it like I did, and kind of carried on. And it wasn't until like a couple months ago he was like, "You remember that?" He's like, "Yeah, I smelled it," and we were just laughing to ourselves, just like, it made me a better CNA. Because I wasn't sure how I was going to handle all these things. And I was like, well, I'm used to, being around the smells of, what I would be interacting with. And I was like, I don't know how I'm going to deal with it. Like, like pee and poop and all this. And a lot of people are like asking me on these advice columns, put some vapor up on your nose. I'm like, once you've been doing it for a couple months, it really doesn't feel like anything. It's really not that big of a deal. Right.
You just sensitize. Yeah, we get very precious, when we, the way that we've socialized, and we've kind of compartmentalized ourselves away from anything that's natural. So, it's like everything becomes insulting to our senses, or insulting to our, socialization, and we've really become bougie in that way, for lack of a better word, right? In terms of just natural things. And so it is hard to embrace. I mean, even I have to admit, and it's interesting because when my mom became, incontinent, and I remember the first time she was still mobile, but I still had to take her to the restroom and help her. And it was like, it wasn't really what was happening. It was more about, I felt that her dignity, like she felt embarrassed, or it was about me. I didn't know at that point how to make her feel okay about it. And so, I had to learn that, because all those things are very delicate. And when especially with your grandma or my mom, you want to respect them and give them their dignity, and the dignity is based on, our social frames that have been put up. Whether if you're Asian, there's different frames. If you're American, there's different frames. If you're, Indian, there's different frames. But nevertheless, there's frames that we look through.
Absolutely. Like, they don't want you to, feel the stigma of this, but you also don't want them to feel bad about, what they're going through, because it's natural. It's okay. It's what's going on. You have to accept the reality of the situation and do what you can with it.
100%.
You decided, basically you were caregiving and didn't even know you were a caregiver. But something about it talked to you and said, okay, so after she passed, you said, I want to continue doing this. And as you've done it, what are the similarities and differences between caregiving for somebody who is your family, who is your best friend, and somebody who is just, a person that you're doing it for because that's your job now?
Sure. You don't feel the same knowledge, because I grew up with my grandma, so I knew everything that made her tick. I knew all of her patterns. I knew how she was and how to react with her, or how to respond to something. But when you're in someone else's house, it's hard to know how they react. Also, you have to navigate their house, like where their trash cans are, where their spoons are, how they like their coffee, how they like their cereal. It's stuff you have to learn. It's such a learning curve. Whereas with family, you already know everything. You don't need to care plan, because you've already done the care planning mentally. You just don't have it on paper. And then when you work at a home care agency or a facility, they give you a care plan, toilet twice, every 2 hours or something like that. Your regular schedule, and then you have to learn their routine. Like, I had a lady that lived in a community who was very particular about her bedtime routine. She had 6 pillows. She had a paralyzed right arm, so we had to make sure that we put on and took off her clothing, bearing that in mind. And she had a very particular routine with her hair and pinning it up a certain way, and she was like, "Oh, you did it like that." And then she had this essential oil diffuser that had to be filled up. She had very particular routines about how her nighttime was. So there's a lot of a learning curve, but I think the hardest part is developing rapport, because you don't know what they like, what makes them tick, if they want a talker, if they want someone quiet to just come in, do what they need to do and get out. It's hard to read people, and that's not what's in care plans. It's about what you need to get done, what all you need to do for them, then you just leave, answer their call,
right.
leave.
And with your family, you have a haiku. You have you have your shorthand. You know, I can look in my mom's eyes and go, I know it. I know.
Yeah.
Because I can know what she's thinking, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
I do. And, and I mean, I've not been a caregiver other than for my children to, a stranger, but I do relate in some way that when I would visit my mom at assisted living, I got to know a lot of the other residents really, really well, and became really close to them and look forward to seeing them and started to really know them, and I could make them laugh, and I could make that, we really had relationships. And so, and that is the most important part, is the socialization, that is key. And that's what's happening now with COVID, because there's not enough socialization and people are isolated in the nursing homes, in skilled nursing homes. And it's, that is the tragedy.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's not enough staff, but the thing is, there's not a caregiver shortage, in my opinion. There's a shortage of employers willing to pay them appropriately and give them the benefits and the culture that they need to succeed. And the other side of that is there are some places that have caregivers that do activities, caregivers that help with cooking, and they do like the whole operation of it. That way you can get to know your residents better. Because when you're just coming in and giving them a shower and leaving, you don't really get to develop any relationship with them. There's no time, because you're going from room to room. Whereas if you were doing all of these things, you'd be the one cooking their meals. You know their preferences. If they're, having a rough day, you can get them a cookie and it'll make them feel better. Like if you're doing all of those things for those residents and you have a super low ratio of residents you have to take care of, you can develop better relationships with them. It's so nice seeing those relationships unfold.
And that's what makes being a caregiver. That's what gives you the kind of feedback and joy in your work, right? So you're going to do better if you're enjoying your work. If you're just there doing a job, you're going to be a terrible caregiver, and the person you're caring for it's going to be a bad experience. If it just will be, because we're dealing with people, we're not dealing with cogs, and
right.
and
right?
We're
too.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So if you're in there and you're resenting your job because you're not paid well, or you're harried because you can't survive on $8 an hour, and the agency is taking a percentage of that, I mean, it's really shameful. Mm-hmm. So it really is, and this kind of career in particular demands that you create a relationship with the people you're working with. It demands it. I mean, can you imagine if you went to a dentist and he just didn't say a word to you? Just you got in the chair, they don't say. I mean, there's no rapport.
Yeah,
you would go, why am I letting this stranger put his hands in my mouth or her hands in my mouth? I mean, there's something about dealing with people. You have to have a relationship. And when you're dealing with people that are elderly and especially dementia and Alzheimer's, it takes the time it takes, and it takes the steps that it takes, and it may take those steps over and over and over. And if that's what the job description is, then that's what it is. But we have to be able to support that.
Absolutely. And there's such a problem when it comes to memory care with the turnover of staff, is that you need that consistency. They need to see the same people every day, or at least on a regular basis. When you have such, a revolving door of caregivers, it's so hard for people to adjust. And I think another important part is keeping couples together. I used to work at a assisted living and memory care place where the wife started to, advance in her condition and needed to be moved over to memory care, and her husband was still over in assisted living, and they wouldn't let him move over. And I feel like that really contributed to her decline, because why else do you think she's saying, I want to go home? or I need to see my husband, because, they should be together. And I think that separation is so cruel to do when it comes to, spouses who've been married for, however many years.
For both. Yeah.
It's cruel. It's absolutely cruel. Again, using my mom as an example, when the first time they moved into assisted living, my mom had begun her journey with Alzheimer's, and then my stepdad, who was 12 years older, and her best friend, like they were just, inseparable. He was starting to decline physically. He couldn't hear, he couldn't see that well. He couldn't walk that well. My mom was physically perfect. So together they made almost a full human, and but they loved each other, even though they were hilarious. Dawn and I wrote a TV series based on them because they just cracked. I mean, literally, the two of them together were just crazy. But, they didn't have a memory care unit at this assisted living. It was really lightly assisted. And my family and I went in there and just said, we can't separate them. And, and he will be her memory and she will be his eyes and ears. So can you please take them together? And they did.
Good.
They did.
You have to ask.
And
you got to speak.
You have to ask. But you're so right, because I think my mom, I think that would have been the decline. I mean, she would have declined so quickly because of that, because she was so attached to him and he was attached to her.
Just going back to what makes a great caregiver, and some of that is connecting with the person you're caring for. How do you balance that and becoming too emotionally attached? Because eventually it's going, or do you just say, you know what? That's the way it is. I'm not going to prevent myself from becoming emotionally attached to this person.
Well, sure. There's a term for this. I think it's compassionate detachment. And you try to do your best emotionally to bond with this person, to develop that rapport, but to not go too deeply into other matters that may cause you to, get too emotionally attached. So what I tried to do was to make the best day for this person without giving away too much of myself, because that would, take from me and from what I was going home with. And I think a lot of it is self-care, taking care of yourself, finding your hobbies, having your, circle of support that really gives you, fills you back up at the end of the day, just debriefing. And I think having a way to talk about things at work is a really helpful way. Like when I worked in home care as an administrator, it was terribly taxing on me. Dealing with, because I was the one that picked up the phones, and so whether it was a complaint about a caregiver, a complaint about a client, I heard everything. And when you're trying to schedule shifts, meaning you're trying to get the client and caregiver compatibility down to a science, it made it so tough to want to do my job. But I did it because of the clients, and make sure they got care, and to help the caregivers get hours. That's what kept me going. But at the end of the day, it was so taxing on me. I wish I would have had an outlet with my supervisors, my peers, just to vent at the end of the day. It doesn't even have to be, with names, just saying today was really tough. I wish I could have filled that other shift with the other caregiver if they hadn't called in to complain about something. And I think that really resonates throughout the whole healthcare industries, not having a way to vent your concerns about your day because it's not a part of your clocked in shift. That's not a part of it.
And it should be, right?
Reporting on how things went physically, things that you can observe, but your personal experience isn't a part of, your shift. It's something that you deal with outside of work. And it shouldn't have.
And it should be with any job that's stressful, like our first responders and things like that. We had this guest on a couple of weeks ago who wrote a book. He's a Alzheimer's researcher, and also wrote a book called "Forgetting the Benefits of Not Remembering." And Scott Small, and he was. Oh, thank you. I mean, he's just an extraordinary guy. But he talked about a lot of his research was around PTSD, and he used himself as an example. When he was in the army in Israel at 19, he saw horrendous things, as did everyone else in his troop. But when they were released, they didn't just release him home and back to normal life. They released him that was still part of their service, which was to to have that debriefing, to have that cathartic socialization and he said we literally we sat around, we drank, we said, we talked, we had macabre jokes, dark humor, the same thing, and we got it out of our system, and none of us had PTSD. And he said, and that's not anecdotal, that is science.
Absolutely, you need that. That's so
Yeah,
necessary.
I mean, most psychiatrists go to psychiatrists, or psychologists go to psychologists because they need to. If you keep everything in that you just experienced and have no outlet for it, it's going to build up and it's going to come out in some way that's not healthy. So, do you see a solution for that? Do you see having a counselor or somebody that people can go and caregivers can go and download? Because I don't know if that exists anywhere.
Absolutely, and I think that's so important. I'm doing some personal research on the symptoms and effects that people have had when caregiving, and most people that I've surveyed experience 11 to 15 symptoms as a result of their caregiving, whether it's anxiety, depression, weight loss, weight gain. So many different things come from caregiving, and the goal of the research is to make caregiving a CPT code, or something in the diagnosis manuals, because usually when it comes to caregiving, it's coaching a caregiver on treatment or for their care recipient. It's not for the caregiver. So the goal of that is to make sure that providers understand that caregivers are not just caregivers to their care recipient. They are patients within their own right and deserve to be cared for and treated just as their care recipient does. Yeah. And that's the goal of that, to help with compensation as well. Like, those mesothelioma commercials. I want caregiving to be something like that. Like, have you ever been a caregiver? You may be entitled to compensation. Because it's going to be difficult to make political and governmental change in terms of caregiver compensation. I feel like it's going to be very, very a long process if it does ever happen. So I feel like if we can get grants or something put together as like a pile of money for caregivers to pool from, I think that may be a better short-term approach.
I think all the above. I think we need to do, just go out and bang the drums and do all of those things, because, look at even in the entertainment industry, there's like Screen Actors Guild has put together funds for emergency funds, and they're able to do that to support our colleagues, and during the pandemic, and also before that, there was when we were on strike, the writers, the Screen Actors Guild throws a big net of financial help and assistance, just money that they raise and bring to the members of our community, and we need to do that, even if we started there, where the community supports the community, and it's interesting. I was just reading, Dawn, last night, an email I got from the Jewish home, which is where my mom is at. And it's, extremely, it's one of the best facilities. They have a high ratio of CNAs to residents, five residents to one CNA. Obviously it's less now because of COVID, because of Omicron, but they've suffered so much because of this crisis that we've been in, that they wrote out an email that came out a couple of days ago that was basically, we will not be able to take care of your family members if we're not financially supported. 70% of their residents are subsidized by Medicaid, and they can't do it. There's not enough money. So that's a crisis, with a capital crisis, because if we don't have facilities to take care of our elders, we're going to implode. Like, society will. I mean, we have a huge generation of senior citizens.
Absolutely. I think it's a really big problem. Like, in Missouri and here in Kansas, a lot of nursing homes have closed for various reasons, mostly staffing related, vaccine mandate related. It's not sustainable to be in long-term care right now, unfortunately, with the current state of affairs. And it really underscores the importance of family caregivers, because who else is going to be taking care of them? In the event that a nursing home closes, they say that they have to find a place for the older adult to go to. But think about this. You did the research to find a high-quality place for your loved one to move to. that doesn't go the same way when an administrator is looking for your next place. They don't have that compassion. Right. They don't have that, oh, well, this person wants XYZ features in their nursing home or their next place. Let me make sure I keep those in mind. They don't have those factors at the top of their mind. They're just trying to get rid of these
motivations.
They just want to find a bed, maybe, or if
exactly.
that. If
but,
that.
And you know, to add on to that, a lot of people don't have advocates. They don't have personal advocates. So what happens to those people? You know, who just by the however their life is played out, they're the last one left in their tribe. Right. Who takes care of them and who advocates for them? And if we don't have caring caregivers that will, you know, be a surrogate family member for them, what's the point of keeping people alive physically? I have a big problem with that. Mm-hmm. That feels like torture for me. That feels like, you know, it's purgatory.
Yeah, absolutely. Or with people who don't speak English, or, you know, they don't have staff that speak their language. Like, I worked at a assisted living that had 2 Portuguese residents, a brother and sister. None of us spoke Portuguese. A lot of it was nonverbal communication. I tried to kind of hold up a chalkboard, or, you know, bring 2 versions of a meal, like, you know, which ones do you want? And it felt tough because they're not getting the full resident experience that they deserve, you know, paying as much as they do to stay there, and, you know, to have just a normal experience like every other resident there. I feel like they were really gypped in terms of that experience.
Same with dementia.
Dementia, because
because they can't communicate.
If you can't speak, like my mom's at the point where she can't really talk unless, you know, every once in a while I can get a nice sentence out of her, and it's like, you know, my joy. Yeah. But you know, for the most part, she can't go, oh, you know, Donna, I'm really thirsty. Can you bring me some water? So instead, she ends up in the hospital because she's completely dehydrated, because people don't speak dementia. Nobody, you know, most people.
It is a language in and of itself, and the healthcare system operates in a different language too.
I'm sure, because Jennifer, I saw it over Zoom. I said it to the nurses. She looks dehydrated. And then when Dawn came to visit her the Saturday before she went into the hospital, we were both there, and I said she looks dehydrated. I went to tell the nurses, I think she's, you know, she needs water. She needs to be hydrated.
That's because her regular nurses aren't there, or there's not enough of them. That's just due to the situation now at that particular facility, which is amazing. There are a lot of facilities that are not amazing, and
they don't know their baseline.
And this is going to be the normal, whether there's COVID or not, and that's you know, we have to get around that. And I don't know what the answer to that is. I don't know what your thoughts on that are, but I mean, that's just resources that don't exist.
Yeah. There are too many, you know, people who need care and not enough people who are able to provide it. And, you know, when it comes to people immigrating here, they might not come with the rest of their families. So when they age here, they might not have people to advocate for them, to retrofit their home to make it safe to age in place. There are so many things that, you know, can be done. And something I'm trying to advocate for is for home care agencies to start a family caregiver training program, which can help their future clients stay in place until they're ready, or, you know, come to terms with needing home care services, because not everybody's ready when they find it. Like, oh, look, there's home care services, but, you know, my loved one isn't ready to make that transition. So I can go to this agency, get educated on how I can provide care, because not everybody's prepared to be a caregiver at any given time. And it's
or
not like
able
a hospital
to,
or nursing home to take the time to train you on what you need to know as a family member. They just kind of, oh, well, we got to send you home. We have a new admit. We got to get in. You know what I mean? That's not their concern.
Right.
And so if they can get trained through a home care agency that has the time, because they're doing new caregiver orientations all the time. So if they can, you know, scoot a family member in there to observe, watch, learn new skills, by the time that they are looking for home care services, who do you think they're going to go to?
Right.
Or if that family member suddenly loses their job, gets laid off, who could potentially provide them with a job because of the existing skills that they have, that they got from this home care agency? I think it's super helpful all around, and it will foster positive relationships in your community without having to actively market.
Right. Because I remember when my parents were, right before we put them into the first assisted living, there was a social worker that came because, you know, I guess by my my mom's doctor reporting that she had, because you have to report when someone has mild, cognitive disorder. And they came and said, you have to have home care. Like you cannot live, and if you don't, then you need to move into some sort of assisted living care. And they gave us two choices, because, a lot of, my stepdad was like, we don't need it. We're fine. We don't need it. They get very, very indignant, and it's, it becomes, it's very difficult to embrace that, obviously. Mm-hmm. And so they were very resistant to it. But it was just done without grace, the way it was presented to them, that it's like, of course they're going to resist. Mm-hmm. Of course. Because it's not presented.
Choices, I think, is disingenuous. Like,
yes.
There are a lot of consumer-directed programs out there where you can select who you want to be as your caregiver, and they'll get paid through Medicaid. There are a lot of programs like that out there, and they, you think they'd have at least one person that they trust to take care of them, even if it's on like a couple hours a day or a week basis, just to kind of check in on them. Like, that's not those aren't your only two choices.
Right, but that's what's given, because it's a
profitable choice.
Yes, it's a profitable choice because it takes less time, for one thing, right? And it becomes, what it did was, like, it made it so difficult for us as family members. It became a very hard situation, and it made it a situation that is delicate even harder. Because the way it was presented, it becomes very unattractive to the persons that you're trying to entice and invoke this kind of change.
Who you're talking to. Know how to approach.
Know your audience.
Ask them what your priority is. Is your priority to stay home, or is your priority to age in a quality community in your area? Like there's a lot of things and a lot of factors that are important. Like, is your food the culturally, appropriate food for you available in communities in your area outside of your home? Like, what are your priorities? What's important to you? Because then that can help inform where you go next.
And, and the other issue is the cost of care. Sometimes you can have all the priorities you want. This is what I want. But money says, yeah, but you're not going to get that. Mm-hmm. And this is where, this is such a huge, it's like, where does government, where does society come in as a whole that will, and all of this, look, if we take care of everybody, it benefits everybody. But, though that's a huge question. It's a huge, and I think it's going to have to start with your generation, honestly. Because the future, has to be taken care of now. So what can you, as somebody who's in this field and is so passionate about it, where do you see the possibilities as far as changing the face of caregiving for our society? I know it's a massive question, but maybe you have some ideas on that.
Sure, I have a couple. I think really elevating the family caregiver role, and really making sure that they get the support they need, the training they need, the community resources they need, because not a lot of people are equipped and prepared to be a family caregiver. I don't think a lot of people ask if they're ready to be a family caregiver or what all they're actually agreeing to, because if they knew what all they were agreeing to, they probably wouldn't do it. Or make sure that you're the right person. It's okay to say no, but who in your family or in your community that would be a good fit, who knows your loved one enough to take care of them. Making sure that people can get paid for the caregiving that they do, because so much of it is like a second shift or third shift for people, trying to make ends meet and to be able to afford. Most people are spending about $7,000 out of pocket each year on caregiving expenses, and that can put a dent in anybody's income, no matter how much you make. And I think right now, in terms of senior living, there's a lot of emphasis on luxury senior living communities. But the luxury senior living communities don't serve the bulk of the people who are going to be aging. And only about 2 to 3% of seniors end up living in a senior living community, but they come from all income backgrounds. And I feel like we're, really doing ourselves a disservice in putting so much emphasis on, the luxury upper income tiers. We need to do more middle market and lower income levels to really serve, all of our older adults evenly. I feel like there's such an emphasis that people put on these amenities, and I feel like people are really losing touch with what really matters, which is the care, the staffing ratios, hiring enough caregivers. Nobody cares about your, courtyard being,
True.
Or, it's not going to be a pool that makes someone say yes, I doubt. These luxury amenities aren't going to be the thing that makes someone choose a community over another. It's going to be the quality of customer service and the experience, the resident experience, also the caregiver's experience. Because if you're going through caregivers left and right, that should be an indicator of a community. A lot of people don't ask about caregivers or talk to caregivers when they're doing a tour of community, and I feel like it's very indicative of how things are going to go. So I feel like there should be a lot of emphasis put on caregiver retention. When it comes to senior care in general, caregivers need to come first. Not that seniors and older adults are less important, but you can't take care of anyone unless you have a stellar workforce behind them.
What should somebody look for when they're going to look at a facility that's like, should I put my loved one here? What questions should they ask? What should they look for other than there's a great pool here? Yeah,
I think a lot of it is the individual's priorities, yet again. Talking about, what's important to you? Is it the food? Is it the quality of the amenities? Some people want the amenities. Do they have multiple levels of care? Do I have to worry about moving if I start to decline? I think the CCRCs have a good idea when it comes to offering multiple levels of care. That way you're not having to move everything, super far away if you're moving somewhere else to receive care. If there are other hospitals nearby or, community resources nearby, like do you have to go a half hour from here to get to your local doctor? I think understanding their corporate leadership and their executive team structure, what backgrounds they come from, because that can really drive the direction of a community. If someone comes from a senior living background, if they're coming straight from an MBA program, what does their background look like? Their staffing ratios, because when you're working with 8 residents in a shift, that's 1 hour of care per person, but that's also not taking into account that you take a half-hour lunch break, that you get pulled in for a meeting, that you're doing report and rounds at the beginning and end of each shift. So you're really not even getting the chance to provide 8 hours of care when you're doing an 8-hour shift. So that's something that a lot of people don't think about.
And that's something that you and I are discussing, which is about, making state and national regulations for ratios of caregiver to patient, nurse to patient, because there is no regulation. And I really do think that all the problems start there. The understaffing issue is a huge problem, and that's based on economy. And so those are the things that we're going to talk about in a big way. And we're gonna make a coalition. We're creating a coalition, and I'm pushing Jennifer to the front. She needs to be the face of this because she is our future, and she's a fantastic representative of our future. I just can't thank you enough, Jennifer, for everything that you're doing, and I'm so proud to walk beside you and know you, and I just think you're extraordinary, and your grandma is so proud of you. And the love that you show and the heart and the empathy is just fantastic. And I applaud you and I love you. And thank you for being on the show.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure. Will be more. And watch this girl. She's going to be something special. What do we always say, Dawn?
You know what we always say? And I think it's really important, and it's something that Jennifer, just lived, and that was love is powerful.
And does live.
Love is contagious, and love conquers all. And we thank you all for joining us, and we can't wait to see you next time.